let's check in with one of our favorite anti-vaxxers with the potential of RFK Jr. Nominated, whether he gets confirmed or not, and we shall see, to Secretary of Health and Human Services. One of the guys that he's floating, I guess, a lawyer who has been advising RFK, and in the course of this guy's lawyering work, has asked the Food and Drug Administration to revoke its approval of the current polio vaccine because it's not been tested against the placebo. Now, let's be clear. It is considered medically unethical to, when you're talking about something like polio, back in, what was it, in the 40s or the 50s? You had something like, in the late 1940s, 35,000 people, and I would say my guess is off the top of my head, our population in this country was about a third, maybe a little bit less than what it is today. 35,000 were paralyzed from polio every year. 35,000. The vaccine came online in 1955. It became 100 people by the 1960s. So just to give you a sense of what the polio vaccine. So the idea that you would give some kids the polio vaccine and then other kids, nobody knows which is which, right? That's the way you do the experiment or the placebo test. It's completely medically unethical.
Yep.
Here is Jimmy Dore. Again, it's hard to assess stupid or evil in the sense that he would spread these anti-vaccine lies for money. It's hard to assess. They're not mutually exclusive. And do I mean evil and like cartoonishly? No, I just mean like he's like these rapacious corporate executives who he claims to be against, in that he will privatize the profits of his vaccine denial and externalize the cost to society in the form of diminished public health. And here he is taking a kernel of truth and twisting it and warping it in a way that is extremely dangerous. And let's be clear, he's doing this because he's attacking Peter Hotez, who, amongst the class of people who develop vaccines, maybe not the only one, but certainly the most prominent one, to decommodify vaccines, to undercut the entire premise of why these anti-vaxxers think these vaccines are bad, or at least the only sort of like rational explanation they have.
The shadowy intellectual property regime.
Exactly. And so here is, my favorite is he asked Siri for backup on this because the guy never reads anything anyways. This is Jimmy Dore is what is basically, I guess, Tim Pool without the beanie and with a middling comedy background.
And with the why I left the left shtick luster having worn out, so all he is just like a kind of stale hack.
Old crank.
Here we go.
Outbreaks this year. We've got polio that's been in the wastewater in New York State.
So you know where the polio, it says polio's been in the wastewater in New York State. You know where that polio came from?
No.
The vaccine. That's another, he doesn't tell you that. So there's the oral vaccine, which we give to poor countries. And what is that? That's got a live virus in it. And that ends up a lot of times causing polio in people.
Wait, should I stop drinking wastewater?
But we covered that story. So yeah. I know that that's where that polio came from. They said it didn't come from nature. It came from a vaccine. The live virus vaccine. I know that because I covered that story.
What if I fart into a pillow? Would that cause?
I just want to say, like, he's so proud of himself because he actually remembered the vague outlines of a story. Now,
I've got object permanence.
I want you, I want you to just like stop for a moment and try and put yourself in the minds of the whatever addled, minds of people who listen to Jimmy Dore on a regular basis, and think for a moment how they're absorbing this information. There's an oral vaccine, and that's the way that people catch polio, right? I mean, this is what he's telling them, that the vaccine is a net negative. All right, just continue with this because he's going to back it up by asking Siri.
Polio and the wastewater in New York come from? Have been linked to samples found in Israel and London wastewater. The strain found in Rockland internationally was derived from an old-fashioned oral. It came from the vaccine, from the oral polio vaccine. Do you see how this guy's just lying to you? Do you see how he just lies to you about everything? He's lying to you.
Now,
He's lying to you about the.
Now, Hotez is saying the problem is that people are unvaccinated. But Jimmy's trying to make like, no, the problem is that people are vaccinated. The oral vaccine is where this came from and where this person got paralyzed. But continue. Let's just listen to a little bit more because I'm going to read you the actual story, which makes it very clear the dynamic is the opposite of what Dore is talking about. The specific fact that he's talking about is true. But the way that Dore is, either because he's too stupid or because he's too nefarious, reinterpreting it to make it sound like the real danger is the vaccine to polio, not polio itself. Go.
Vaccine. Do you see how this guy's just lying to you? Do you see how he just lies to you about everything? He's lying to you. He's lying to you about the polio vaccine.
Yeah.
He's lying to you saying that polio's come back because of anti-vaxxers. No, it came back. It came back because it's in the oral vaccine.
So pro-vaxxers caused it is what you're telling me.
All
This guy, if this guy's lips are moving, he's lying.
last year.
Okay, so there it is. I mean, like, even his dumb sidekick says, so you're telling me that polio exists because of the vaccine now? And let's just walk through this because, look, I don't give a shit about Jimmy Dore, but everything he says
This is dangerous.
is not just dangerous. He is repeating the dumbness and the nefariousness and really, frankly, the greed of like a whole cohort of people in this country, not the least of which RFK Jr. So this is a story from October 4th, 2022. There was a guy suffering from paralysis after contracting polio. It was the first known U.S. case in nearly a decade, the first in New York since 1990. The patient was unvaccinated. My guess is, it doesn't say it specifically.
There's a whole line devoted to it. The patient was unvaccinated. It's a whole paragraph to itself.
My guess is, being from Rockland County, I suspect, and this is not terribly relevant, although, that this is a fundamentalist, a Hasidic Jew. In that community, they have very, very, very low vaccination rates. Again, in the 1940s, the reason why polio vaccine was developed was because more than 35,000 people annually were paralyzed. This is a country a third of the size of here. That would be equivalent to, 15,000, 120,000 people a year, not just sick from polio, paralyzed from polio. By 79, polio had basically been eliminated in the U.S. But something interesting happened in the world. I'm not sure when ship travel started, but Just because you've wiped out polio in the U.S. doesn't mean that you've wiped out polio everywhere. I mean, that's why they had to go in and vaccinate in Palestine. Now, I wonder if Jimmy Dore was going to argue that the Palestinians should not be vaccinated against polio, because we know how dangerous that is for people to be vaccinated. But I'll continue. They found this polio, and they were able to analyze the strain. Where did it come from? And they believe that the virus originated overseas in a country that still used the oral polio vaccine. Why do they use the oral vaccine? Because it's probably cheaper, probably lasts longer. They can probably deliver it better. America stopped using that vaccine more than 20 years ago. It contains a very small, weakened live virus that sometimes can mutate to become more virulent. Now, keep that in mind, because this is the important part. That is the important part. They did this genetic analysis. They think that it's one used in the... When that weakened virus circulates, and it does circulate, it circulates in other countries. Eventually, somebody comes to this country. Even if you have that oral vaccine in you and it has helped you, you can still... it comes out in the wastewater, particularly, like within a certain period of time in which you've used it. If it comes in contact with an unvaccinated person, not a vaccinated person, a vaccinated person is not in any way subject to that even mutated version of that weak virus, because they are vaccinated against it. But if it comes in contact with an unvaccinated person, it can hurt them. Now, let's be clear. 2 of the 3 naturally occurring polio viruses have been eradicated in the 21st century. We still have another strain that is out there. It's very dangerous. Again, 35,000 people in the U.S. In a place like Gaza, for instance, the polio could spread enormously, and you'd have the percentage of kids there that could be subject to paralysis would be through the roof. As recently as 1988, polio paralyzed 350,000 children annually across 125 countries. Today, Pakistan and Afghanistan are the only countries in the world where remaining wild-type polio is still endemic, so it's floating around there. But people from India and Pakistan, they travel to other countries. And the reason why it doesn't really become endemic in other countries is because the rates of vaccination there, either orally or in terms of a needle, are high enough that it contains it. You can't have it spread like wildfire. There is 27 cases confirmed this year. The annual number of wild polio viruses has declined by 99% since 1988. And that is because of not placebos. Good guess. It was going to be one or two. It was either going to be one or the other. It was either placebos or the polio vaccination. So recently immunized people can pass the oral vaccine virus to others for a few weeks. But again, it is not normally a problem because the strain is weakened, so it does not cause disease in anybody. And in fact, it can actually help build immunity because it's weak enough that it's like almost like getting the oral immunization yourself.
And that's how vaccines originally worked, basically.
The problem begins when immunization rates are so low in a community, let's say up in Rockland County, maybe in a Hasidic community, that the weakened virus from the vaccine spreads uninterrupted for a prolonged period and mutates into a virulent strain called a vaccine-derived polio virus. And when people who are not immunized catch the mutated vaccine-derived virus, they can become paralyzed, like the patient in Rockland County. Now, the idea that that individual only got polio because of the oral vaccine is baby-brained. Because if you eliminate the vaccine, oral or injectable, the polio vaccine since 1955, people would be getting polio at a rate that I don't know that we could even imagine right now. Because if in the 1940s, you were having 35,000 kids a year get paralyzed by polio, it's not just, well, times it by 3. We have 330 million people in the country now. Maybe then it was 110. These are just rough numbers. Times it by 3, then we would only have, 110,000. No, because it would accelerate. That's what epidemics, pandemics do.
We're just more interconnected. We would also have air travel. It would go across borders. It would be a disaster.
So, yes, it is true. This person was infected because the oral vaccine exists, but then also 37% of, in some areas of Rockland County, only 37% of kids in this age group are up to date with their vaccines. Mm-hmm. Vaccine rates dropped from 67% in 2020 to 60% in 2022. The reason why this person got polio was because A, they were unvaccinated, B, the oral vaccine exists, and it can and that can mutate and travel around the globe. And C, because the alternative would be millions upon millions upon millions of people getting polio. This is what public health is. This is what this is what, the idea of herd immunity and the reason why you need to have high vaccination rates. This is why. And the idea that this guy would be safe if it wasn't for the oral vaccine is baby-brained, because the number of people who would have polio in this country and around the world would be so incomprehensible.
Yeah, and it's also going to or it's going to worsen health outcomes for people who, like the people in his audience. Say you're in a community like this one, it's more likely that a virus would mutate and harm you in this particular way, and it doesn't necessarily even need to be polio because of exactly what he's spreading. And then you know what these same charlatans go around and turn around and do? Then they'll blame those outcomes on vaccinations in the same way that he's doing right now. Right. And I don't know how long the shelf life of that is, because eventually people would start to pick up on it, I would hope. But it doesn't really matter, because if this kind of ideology, and RFK Jr. is currently, Trump picked him for a cabinet selection, he would have enormous power. If this were to actually get implemented, it would be so devastating to basically every family in this country, because it would be normalized by a certain segment of the population, with Jimmy Dore's aiding and abetting there.
Holtenheim IAMs the show to say this vaccine discourse is a good example of how the right weaponizes ignorance and stupidity to bog down societal progress towards a more empathetic system. It's truly insane to be arguing about vaccination safety when we know for a fact that tens of thousands of people die each year due to denied care for the sake of profit.
But is it insane if you're trying to discredit the entire concept of public health, say in a country where people have a crazy reaction to a CEO dying because they all hate the healthcare system? And I think that this is clearly the reason that the Koch brothers and all these people, like the right wing adjacent to the anti-vaxxing, is because it's a way to discredit public provisioning of healthcare.
Play that last line by his co-host or whatever it is, his buddy there. Because this is what people take away when they watch this video. They do not pick up on okay, yes, this oral vaccine can, in extremely rare circumstances, infect somebody who is unvaccinated and cause them polio, but it has all but eradicated polio from the rest of the world. So it's the idea. I don't even know.
In lives, it's just crazy.
It's the net lives that have been saved. We can't even calculate, right? Because these are diseases that accelerate as they go around. So we can't even, we have no concept of how bad it could be or what it could have mutated into if it's left alone. Just play that last line because this is what people walk away from.
Vaxxers caused it is what you're telling me.
Because it's in the oral vaccine.
So pro-vaxxers caused it is what you're telling me.
All
Pro-vaxxers. There's another way of saying the word pro-vaxxer. It is public health or just non-idiots.
Yep. And if this is a big look, because we're talking about this healthcare CEO too, we don't have enough of a concept of public health in this country, in part because we have an extremely privatized system. I think it creates deep resentment in our population that gives an opening to grifters or to
Alternative medicine entirely.
alternative medicine, but also just like people who are selling your health as a consumption choice because people feel like they want to take control over their health care in a society that doesn't let you do so in a way that's really expensive.
And the only way you are is as a consumer.
And the only way you are is as a consumer. And so Jimmy Dore used to talk about Medicare for all the time. Has he talked about that recently? And if he has, how does this play into it? Because this is the problem with anti-corruption or anti-establishment politics, or about the nefariousness of a certain industry that isn't baked in an anti-capitalist critique or isn't baked into the idea of like building our government in a leftist vision. It's because then you can just critique one industry without basically saying the problem isn't that we vaccinate this country for public health. The problem is that our medicine and our vaccines are captured by corporate conglomerates, and it's why it should be in the public sphere. And it's also why he would never address what you started this conversation with about Dr. Hotez, because he came up and was trying to put forward a public non-big pharma vaccine alternative. But we don't have the infrastructure in this country. And when Donald Trump was president, he certainly wasn't engendering that kind of research. He wanted it all in private hands. And Operation Warp Speed was actually a success at reducing transmission and severity. The big problem with it was that it wasn't owned by the public after we poured billions of dollars into the research for Pfizer, Moderna, and then J&J.
And I just want to make something clear too. The concept of public health that is in practice when it comes to the polio vaccine is the exact same concept that Medicare for all is foundationed on. Because the idea with Medicare for all, they would talk about these death panels, right? Because what Medicare for all would do is it would say, look, we're going to look at the efficacy of treatments, broadly speaking, across the entire population of the country. And we are going to tell doctors, we're not going to reimburse you for practices that do not lead to better health outcomes for the vast majority of people. It's the same concept of public health. There is no doubt in my mind that there are people injured by vaccines. Of course they are. There are people injured by taking Tylenol. There are people injured by taking any medicine. No medicine, no medical procedure is 100% safe. That does not exist. We have not developed that. I don't think you can. People are just too different. But you are treated with a medical treatment or medicine based upon a high rate of efficacy. And when you're talking about stuff that is contagious across a society, that's the way that public health is determined. The reason why rich people don't want a Medicare for all system is because they want to be able to go and they want exclusive access to the best doctor in the in the country. They'll say, like, if our medical system is so bad, why would the prince of, wherever, Saudi Arabia, come here for their X treatment, whatever it is? That's the way they're going to measure healthcare, as opposed to one person getting the best healthcare in the world versus a million getting the second best healthcare in the world, let's say.
Right. So Bobby Kennedy talking about obesity because he's worried about how much people are going to cost him in taxes.
Yeah.
And so this is the issue. We don't have access to the healthcare that prince of Saudi Arabia has. And because that prince of Saudi Arabia has access to the best care in the world, the rest of us get substandard healthcare. Means less access, less ability to, less access, whether it's because there's less doctors who will take, your insurance, or because it really comes down to money. And it is the same concept. Yes, there are going to be individuals in a single payer healthcare system who could have conceivably gotten better care. The millionaires and billionaires. They could have conceivably gotten better care. Now, of course, they'll still have their private doctors and they'll work outside the system, but that's the theory. That's the theory. There are people who are not going to be better off. And yes, you will find individuals under a single payer healthcare who will not be better off. But the overwhelming, it's even bigger than overwhelming, majority of people under a single payer healthcare system will be better off. And that is exactly the same dynamic with vaccinations. And to be clear, the immunity that vaccine makers have in our system is mitigated by a special court, which they talk about as being secretive. And to some extent, it is certainly extrajudiciary, but it is to provide awards to people who are legitimately vaccine injured, because they are having to pay the price of public health. That's the only way public health exists. It's the only way. There is no other way. Giving people the option of taking a vaccine. Some people do. You have the option for HPV. You have the option to take some. You don't have to take shingles vaccine, for instance. Giving people the option to take a vaccine like the polio vaccine is highly problematic, because polio is so devastating and it will continue to mutate. And that's what happened. Had everybody been vaccinated, that person, including, had they been vaccinated, but had everybody around them been vaccinated, that live virus, that oral vaccination would not have killed him. That's just, or I should say, paralyzed him. That's just the reality of it.
You asked about what Jimmy Dore and the Medicare for All thing. That died with the March for Medicare for All, sort of forced the vote sort of thing. But here's one of those sort of Doreites arguing with Matt Binder. For a leftist, it's funny how you don't get what I'm saying. I don't trust the government to implement healthcare because they're too powerful and terrible at everything else. But I want Medicare for All. Like, they're completely out of
get the government hands off my Medicare.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Just fools. Just completely idiots.
I want Medicare for All trademark symbol next to it.
Saying, maybe we should do it at a state and local level. I mean,
well, I'm sure they've been very supportive of New York's efforts to publish.
I'm sure they've noticed them.
Yeah, right. Which fingers crossed on that front.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.